Good morning, and thank you for watching the KC Auction video blog this week. Today we're airing on Thursday as opposed to Friday because I have some things going on tomorrow, and our guest is only available on Thursdays. And I'm super excited to announce and bring to the screen Britt Frank. She's a therapist here in Kansas City, and thanks, Britt, for being with us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on again. It's good to see you.
Fantastic, fantastic. So for those of you who do not know who Britt is, which I find hard to believe because she's all over the place, Britt Frank has a Master's of Social Work, licensed specialist, clinical social worker, and certified somatic experience practitioner. That's what all the letters behind her name there mean. She has been on dozens of podcasts and TV shows and interviews around the country, such as Dr. Michelle Robbins' show, Meredith Atwood, The Sacred Wound, Clap with Jane, Healing Trauma, CPTSD, Everyone's Anonymous, The Same 24 Hours, KSHB, NBC, KC Live, Psych Central, Instagram, Insights with Latrice, Navigating Trauma with Emily Rosen. She is a teacher online and in person. She's won the KU Minion Award as a distinguished teacher. She speaks at associations and groups like the Waldo Brookside Rotary Club, which is where I heard Britt speak before. One of the things that was really interesting when I was doing some research on Britt is I found that Crystal Lampett, who was the host of KC Live here in Kansas City, was just recently interviewed about what she's doing during Corona and COVID. And just in her article, in her interview, she said, I also loved having my therapist friend Britt Frank in for Mental Health Mondays. She always brought substance and smarts to the show. Our viewers really connected with the topics we discussed. And I don't think there's much bigger praise from somebody who out of the blue brings up a guest like that. She's also likes to do aerial gymnastics, which I thought was really interesting. And it's just an amazing person. So Britt, thank you so much. Today we're going to be talking about estate trauma. A lot of people deal with that. One of the specialties that you talk about is grief and loss, and that applies to estate situations so much. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us what got you interested, excited, and passionate about helping people going through all the classes and training that you've done, and what brought you to where you are today?
Well, thank you. That was a very generous description of my bio. So I actually finished, I went to Duke for undergraduate, and when I popped out into the world, I was in advertising and marketing. Therapy wasn't even on my radar. And then through my own, just working through my own anxiety and my own depression and my own stuff, I found that nothing was really helping. Talking about stuff doesn't necessarily help with stuff. You know, we all know how to talk about our problems. So if talking about problems solved problems, there wouldn't need to be therapists. And then I found my way to this work, the trauma work and the body-based neuropsychotherapy through my own. I found a really good therapist after a lot of bad ones, loved what I was learning. My life changed. And then I decided I just want to do this all day long. And so here I am.
Wow, that's amazing. And so how long have you been practicing? How long ago was that? And when did you open up the Greenhouse KC?
I launched the Greenhouse in 2013. So I've been doing independent private practice for 7 years now.
Okay. And so we talked about quickly, we're going to be talking about estate trauma. One of the most stressful times in any person's life is managing the surrounding events of dealing with an estate. Usually it's a mom, dad, grandparents, aunt, uncle, friends, family who have either passed, are going to a retirement home. There's a lot of emotion there. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of baggage there. We see that all the time in our clients. What are some of the things that you see that can help people with to kind of approach that situation as stably or as strongly as they can?
And I feel for people in your line of work, Jason, because you have to do what you do and you have to play therapist. You know,
Absolutely.
At least I just get to sit there and I do what I do and I don't have to manage estates and do, you know, real estate agents have the same dilemma, financial advisors. So it's really the number one thing to being able to work with estate trauma is knowing that that's a thing. And I love that you named that. I haven't heard anyone name it as such. And I kind of want to do a post on my Instagram about it. With your permission, I'll give you a shout out. The that this is your term.
That's,
But
well, I came up with it because they were talking to you about just life in general. So thank you.
it's
Thank you for
a
the inspiration
thing.
of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never named it in those terms, but it's true. And the problem that people get into, because I work with a lot of people that go through dealing with very large estates, and they think it is just a business transaction, and it's not transactional when you're talking about an estate. It's relational, it's generational, and there are a lot of unconscious, unknown, biological, neurological things that happen when you're dealing with family. And people don't know that. And then there's tempers and it's heated and, everyone's freaking out, but they don't know it's because there is this undercurrent of trauma. And with estates, people won't necessarily label it as such. It's like, well, trauma is war, assault, oppression, trauma is those things over there. I have my family's estate over here. That's not trauma. And yes, it absolutely is trauma. Not only is it trauma, but it's grief on top of trauma. It's either grief of we love the person, therefore they're gone, or it's grief of this person was a terrible person, the relationship was terrible, and that's a grieving point too. And what sits on top of trauma and grief always is anger as a protective mechanism. Therefore, Jason, I assume you have a lot of angry people.
Well,
and it's unfortunate because it is trauma. It's not a personality defect, and it's not a moral failing, and it's not weakness. It's actual neurological trauma that is going on with these estates.
Absolutely. And, I realized that many, many, many years ago, that the anger, angst, and anxiety that my clients and potential clients were exhibiting wasn't directed at me necessarily. It might have been like, I'm certainly not infallible, and certainly not with my wife will tell you I can rub people the wrong way really easily. But there's that underlying issue of all the things you talked about, and in leading up to this, we talked about dealing with family members. And I know you have better terms than I do, so please correct me if I say something that's inconsiderate. But how a lot of these stress and anxiety and trauma that people are dealing with are because of specific actions that happen between siblings or between parents and kids. How, dealing with family members in particular, what can people do before they delve into the process of working through the estate?
Sure. And money is such a trigger point. I mean, it's a trigger point for everybody, regardless of, if they don't have any or they have all of it. Money is an incredibly triggering topic. So then you put money with death, with family. I mean, all you have to do is add Christmas to the list and you've got a perfect storm. So before people sit down to these conversations, it's really helpful to know that these conversations will go nowhere good quickly if we do not understand where our brain is. If you look at the brain as a map and you've got these plot points, you want to be here. If right now my plot point is up here and yours is down there and my sister's is over here, the conversation is doomed before it begins. And I've shut down session. I don't do couples or family therapy, but occasionally I have to have groups together. I will shut down a session faster than anything if I don't see everyone's plot points somewhere in the middle. Because there's nothing to be done. There's no good work to get done, and there's no solutions to be had if our brain chemistry is not in at least somewhat of what they call a regulated state. So before you sit in a room with family members or anyone to work out big things, ask yourself, where's my brain and my body on this map? If my heart is pounding and my palms are sweating and my throat is dry, that's not a good place to go into a tough conversation. And so that does extend the process a little. It's like, well, Britt, we don't have time to sit here and breathe. Well, I'll say to that, you don't have time to sit and fight with your family for 4 hours either. This way is more efficient. It's going to take extra time to fight. It's going to take extra time to do this skillfully. So let's just do it skillfully.
Wow. And so you talked about a brain as a map, regulated state, getting on the same page. How do you do that? Because it's rarely that it's just one. Let's just use a brother and sister because we need a parameter, right? It's rare that just the brother or just the sister has an issue. They both have issues. Sometimes it's the same event. Sometimes it's multiple events. How, as a family member, as the brother or the sister, what's a really decent way, good way to reach out to your sibling and say, I know we have these issues. What can we do to at least establish a level playing field before we get into this really stressful situation, before we get in there. Try and make this as easy as we can on each other.
Sure. Now I'm thinking, like, why isn't a state therapist a specialization? It really should be. So you don't ever have to go into this without somebody. I don't do family therapy, but having a family therapist in what you do would actually be incredibly useful. So to answer your question, in order to get what needs to get done, accomplished skillfully, despite all of the baggage with a sibling set, let's say, it can be really helpful to only focus on one thing at a time. Of the mega list of things that are needing to be worked out, what is the least offensive issue that we can start with? We're not talking about how blah, blah, blah. We're not going to address this. We're going to start with this teeny tiny little thing, because what our brains are inclined to do is go to big and bigger. And then it's, you always do this and you never do this. And remember Christmas in 1983 when it's like, okay, whoa, we need to talk. And so to sum that up in a nutshell, what I would say is only talk about the thing you're talking about and be very strategic in which thing you're going to talk about first.
Talk about the thing you're going to talk about.
That's it.
That is a great, great bit of advice. And I shared this with my auction groups and my estate sale groups. Hopefully some of them, anyway, people watching. If you are watching, we went right into this. Please ask questions below. We'll try and get Britt to answer these as we go along. Talk about one thing at a time. It seems so simple.
It's not.
It's not, because baggage is baggage because it just doesn't leave. Right. But if you can remind yourself of that, and as the person who's working with the family, it's hard and it's easy not to get caught up in the he said, she said.
Right.
But I know that I oftentimes will try and tell my clients, I understand what happened in the past, but today's situation is we have to make decisions on the estate. We have to make decisions on the real estate, the antiques, the property, whatever that may be. Those are issues you might want to take up with a therapist. And I've suggested that to many clients over the years.
It's a really good, I've worked with funeral homes, but I've never worked with what you do. And it's really relevant. So obviously there's going to be a lot of very, very high level conflict type things, but not everything is going to be high conflict. So when family members are engaging, start with the things that you're not going to want to destroy each other about. Start simple. Don't start with who's getting the house. Don't start with who's getting, the precious heirloom. Start with, okay, what do neither of us care that much about? On a 1 to 10, what are the 2 and 3 level items? Let's start there, because it's a snowball effect. As we can successfully and skillfully navigate the level 2, 3 items, that gives us a little bit of safety to hit the level 4s. And that hits the level 6s a little bit easier. So by the time, it's like, again, like an onion, you have to peel the layers, and the outer layers will come off a lot more easily if you start there. Most people want to jump right into the most, the highest, most issue, and that is never going to work ever. So don't do that.
Yeah, figure out the Tupperware before you talk about the Tiffany. Before you talk about the Tiffany.
I like that. That's it right there. Yes.
I'm gonna write that up real quick, because I think that was a pretty good one.
That's really good, actually.
Linda, thanks. You're right. I think this is a conversation we all need to have. And yes, I am recording these. By the end of the day, this will be on our YouTube channel as well. You can find it here on Facebook, but our YouTube channel has all of these interviews on them. So yeah, I think, starting with the Tupperware, working to the Tiffany makes a lot of sense. And in more of a sports parlance, because I like sports, and I'm more guy oriented that way. The successes of the Tupperware conversation and the Kleenex lead you to, or the stainless steel versus the sterling silver, right? The stainless flatware is great. We all need a set of stainless in the drawer, but the sterling is the stuff we bring out for the holidays. And that's where, but if you can decide on the stainless and talk about why, I think that's really important to moving to the next step. And so we've talked about stainless and sterling and Tupperware and Tiffany. Personal property, which is where I work with, that's what I deal with. That's where my clients' anxieties and traumas lie, or it's where it's exhibited. What can you talk to people about the importance or non-importance of those personal property items?
That one's so hard, because the things are never about the things. And so to try to make a conversation about the things isn't going to work, because there's so much emotion and memory and story and narrative embedded. So I can, as an outsider, logically look and say, you two are going, like two screaming cats over this particular item, but it's not actually about the item. And so it can help, rather than just like about the thing. We want to actually figure out what are the stories here that we're actually fighting about. What's your story about that piece of jewelry? What's your story about that piece of jewelry? We want to know two things. We want to know what's your story and what's your fear. Because there's always a story and there's always a fear. And underneath that, there's usually a need, or some point of need that didn't get addressed. So this is sort of the counterpoint to the only talk about the thing you're talking about. Sometimes the thing we're talking about isn't the thing that we're talking about. And so we really want to know, not, I want this, it's mine. It's, okay, here's what my story about this is. Here's what my fear around not having this is. And here's the need I'm really hoping to meet by the acquisition of this thing. And that changes the whole dialogue.
Absolutely. And when I put my head down, I'm either referring to previous notes or I'm writing notes as we're talking. So what's your story, what's your fear, and what's your need? Such a powerful, simple question to ask my clients that can get us a long way. Mara asked, and I've known Mara for a long time, our kids went to school together. How do you suggest getting the resistant sibling to show up, and once items are sorted, to remove them from the house? I'm assuming she's talking about the inevitable time crunch we have when we deal in the situation, right? Because A, there's nobody living in the home anymore. There's the expenses of owning the home, the financial reality that it costs money to own it, and once it sells, that money is distributed. So, but there's oftentimes a sibling who just wants nothing to do with it. So how do you get them to engage? And if Mara, if I stated that wrong, please go ahead and post another comment, but I think that's what you mean by that question. So how do you get somebody to engage who's resistant to engaging?
Thanks, Mara. And I can't answer, the legality of dealing with this stuff is outside my scope. I will give you like the clinical answers, but obviously legal has to go first, because if what I say doesn't work with the system, it doesn't work. I'm a big advocate of boundaries. So if you have a sibling that does not want to do it, then okay, bye. So work on the front end. And I've worked with families where it's in the agreement that if the if you want X, Y, and Z from this estate, you are agreeing to pick it up by X date. And if you haven't, then we keep it or donate it. So create a structure rather than trying to force and cajole and please come get this stuff. Oh my God, we have to get this house on the market. We have to get ready for sale. And I have, this car in the driveway and all this, the tools and the thing. It's, well, okay, we'll work out on the front end an agreement that is ironclad. Then you don't have to fight about it. Boundaries are a very effective tool against arguing. There's nothing to fight about. If you've agreed to pick it up by September 6th, then September 7th, bye, gone. It's over. There's nothing to fight about. You agreed to it. The date has come. The date has gone. You haven't shown up. You have made a choice to not get the things that you want.
Yeah, it seems simple.
It's not.
It sounds simple. You're right. It is, but it's having, if you fail to plan, you will plan to fail. Applies to an estate situation as well, right?
Yes.
By putting that plan in place, and it's funny you say September 6th because that's my birthday. So
happy birthday!
Thank you. But yeah, by putting a schedule together, really can help. And then you have a conversation about, well, I can't do it by the 6th. I can do it by the 10th.
That's right.
Then you have a conversation about, again, a really small detail that gives you a success and a platform to work on the next detail, which I think is really, really important.
Right. And boundaries are really important for safety. You can't make people do things. If that was true, again, I wouldn't have a job. But you can never force someone to do things. And it takes a tremendous amount of energy to try to do it. So don't. Create a system, create a structure, create the boundaries. And then that takes care of having to expend energy trying to convince people to do things that they don't want to do.
Absolutely. One of the other things that we see a lot, and I don't know, if you have input on this or not, but I want to ask the expectations of the process of working with the estate. And I know and everyone is different, and it's, I love having these conversations. And I hate them at the same time, Britt, because we talk in generalities about things that aren't general. But when somebody has, like, selling a house and the antiques, there are financial expectations, there are familial expectations. How can you manage, I guess, how do you manage expectations going to an event for yourself and maybe for those around you, again, to try and alleviate some of those issues coming down the road?
So the conversations, any of them, whatever they're about, need to have some semblance of safety. And that goes back to what's your fear, what's your need, what's your story. So coming into this entire process, if my major fear is that I'm going to be, I'm going to miss out on things, if my major fear is I'm not going to be able to have what I need in order to, we need to know what are the stories that we're walking to the table with, because nobody is coming to the table free and clear from baggage. But what happens is people show up, they haven't opened their suitcases, and then they start fighting. And so before we even sit down, it's know thyself. What's in my suitcase? I know I'm going to get mad when we get to this topic. I know that I'm going to get really heated when we come to this particular item to discuss. So I need to come into these conversations with a very heightened awareness of what my expectations, my stories, my fears, and my needs are. It's the same process as when we're, drilling down to the specific items.
So much good stuff. And then kind of to wrap it up, we've talked about a great selection of things this morning. I'm so thankful you're on the air with us. This is all related to mental health. And I want to say real quick, I got to know Britt because of Dr. Michelle Robin here in Kansas City, who I've known for a long time. She stuck needles in my back almost 30 years ago, and she doesn't do acupuncture at all anymore. And she doesn't remember it, but that's beside the point. Our paths have crossed many times, and I asked Dr. Michelle Robin about somebody to speak on mental health through my Brookside Rotary Club, and she suggested Britt. And so I feel like I really want to point out that Dr. Michelle Robin also does amazing work in this space. And Britt,
she's awesome.
Kansas City is blessed to have so many great mental health practitioners in the city, and people who really passionately care about themselves, other people, and the community. One of the things that I think is important is mental health at large in this conversation. How can folks, even before they get to the situation of the estate, that will help them transition to the situation of the estate, do you have a handful of tips or ideas to help people kind of balance and work through these issues before they have to work through these issues?
Yeah. So you cannot tease out mental health issues from estate issues. Those are the same thing. So if the lens that you're coming in with is this is an estate issue, again, the conversation is over. We have to start by understanding this, whether or not you're mentally ill or the healthiest person, it doesn't matter. When it comes to estates and death and loss and family, it has now become a mental health issue. So if that's the lens that we're starting with, that's going to inform all of our decisions and choice points. Therefore, if I know I'm going into this as a mental health issue, I need to know what can I anticipate from my siblings or from the players involved, right? Because my sibling may not be willing to come in with a heightened self-awareness, but I can sit here and anticipate what their move is going to be. Knowing my own strengths, weaknesses, where my trigger points are, and then getting some help and some perspective. Use the sports metaphors. Don't go into this game without a coach. Like you need somebody helping you to create I'm not a sports person, so sports ball metaphors aren't my jam, but you need a coach to help you to know which plays to execute, to know which, maneuvers are going to make sense. Because if you go into a certain thing, trying a certain play out and it doesn't work, then we need strategy. None of these things will work off the cuff. None of these conversations will be successful without a very intentional, deliberate, mental health informed strategy. And if you can't do that on your own, get some help. There's lots of people who can do it.
Yeah. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to that. If you fail to plan, you can plan on failing.
Yes. And most people don't want to call a therapist in this case, not most, some, because it's like, well, I don't have mental health issues. I don't want to see a therapist. It's like, well, first of all, that's stigma. It's inaccurate, but fine. If that's our conversation, you're not going to a therapist because you need therapy. You're going to a therapist because you need someone who's fluent in the language of family dynamics who can help advise you. So I tell people who I see in the situation, don't think of me as your therapist. Think of me as your strategist. I'm your consultant because I can anticipate what your sibling is going to do, because there's patterns. You know, some of the stuff is pretty textbook. I've read those textbooks. That's my job. So if you don't want to see a therapist, then hire a strategist, because again, I have seen very complex issues become very, very easy to navigate with a little bit of strategy, a little bit of planning. And again, I don't need to know your family to know your family, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense, because I don't need to know anything about your family to know what kinds of things are in the house based upon about
Yes.
a minute and a half phone conversation.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, yes.
Because like you said, you've read the books, you've written books. I mean, you're a teacher, you've created curriculum. I've done these kinds of shows for a long time. I've written curriculum on all aspects of this industry. And one of the questions I get or comments I get is, how do you know this stuff? It's the same way that you just know this stuff because it's what we eat, breathe, and live. And I love the idea of hiring a strategist or a consultant, not a therapist, because it is a consultant. You wouldn't sell mom and dad's 401k without talking to a financial advisor, and so you have to take all these things into account. And just an amazing conversation, Britt. Thank you so much. For those, if you're watching and you want to ask Britt questions, she's incredibly responsive on her Instagram page, on her LinkedIn page. You can find out more about Britt. You can see a lot of those shows we talked about are on the greenhousekc.com. Look at the media collaborations tab. I've watched several of them. Very interesting stuff. If you got nuggets off of today, you'll get hundreds of them watching those. Like I said, you can find her on Instagram and LinkedIn. Just look up for Britt Frank or the Greenhouse KC. And if you have questions specifically, Britt at thegreenhousekc.com. Before we sign off the show here real quick, we've monopolized this conversation where I've led it, and what I want to talk about. You've had a lot of experience in the space, a lot of experience around this space. What would you like to say in addition to what we've already said, or anything else at all in regards to mental health, interactions with folks, and things like that? The floor is yours for a few minutes. Whatever you want to talk about, please have at it, Britt.
So the way I can sum it, families are tough. Families are really difficult. Even, quote, healthy families are difficult. Anytime you put a group of humans together, it's going to be tricky. And so the myth is that there's going to be an easy way to do family issues. And there's not. You have two choices and two choices only. And this is true with estates. This is true with addiction. This is true with any mental health issue, any conflict of any kind. Your two choices are, one, to do the work of getting your skills built and doing this efficiently, or doing the work of not doing the work and then having chaos and conflict. Both of them take energy. Both of them take time and effort. Not doing the work is time and energy and effort that is circular and goes nowhere. Taking the time to do the work and get the consulting and get the help is a linear process that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So if you're going to be doing the work either way, do the work that has an end point, not the work that goes nowhere. That's my case for mental health work.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much for watching the KC Auction video blog today. We do this every Friday, generally speaking, with all kinds of guests and topics. Next week, I'm talking to Tama Clark Haynes. She is the antiques diva out of Venice, Italy. So I'll have my first international guest next week. I'm pretty excited about that. She has an antique dealers training program I'm excited to hear more about. The following week, I'll be talking to Sean Terrell from United Country Real Estate and Auction about ranch properties, which is really fun and interesting. You can always send us questions at info@kcauctioncompany.com. If you have questions about anything we talked about today, about episodes we've done in the past, if you have questions you'd like us to address in the future, or a guest you'd like us to talk to, please reach out to us there. Our phone number is 816-283-3633. You can always give a call and see what we'll help you that way. What else am I missing? Oh yeah, my website. I got to show that, kcauctioncompany.com. I do this to try and bring some awareness to my business as well. Britt, thank you so much. And really quickly, Tracy Haley, who has been a guest on my show before, thank you so much for watching Tracy. Tracy's a phenomenal jewelry appraiser here in town who does a lot of work with us and has been on my show a couple of times about different topics. Thanks for watching, Tracy. Mara, Linda, thank you all so much for the comments. Britt, have a great day. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and I look forward to running into you in the future and talking to you about anything and everything in the future.
Thank you so much.